it's interesting about characters. People were like, "Oh, you were so brave to do X, Y, Z," and I think to myself, it felt like there was no other alternative. I don't know how else to be in this world except like this. And so I'm a little reluctant to sometimes take credit for it or to pat myself on the back for this idea of like, oh, can you believe you said that thing? I oftentimes I say, the words were flying out of my mouth before I thought about it.
Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. It's Andrew. I am so excited to let you all know that we are now in the top 40 best liberal arts podcasts list that got sent to me, and we're number three. So thank you all for listening to the podcast. And I just really appreciate that you keep spreading the word. So please make sure you follow us on social media. Instagram is Ivory Tower Boiler Room, TikTok, Dr. Rimby, and please review us on Apple, Spotify. It really, all of it helps. So I hope you just enjoy this episode. And as always, remember, there is an ad-free version on our Patreon. Hi, everyone. Happy Pride Month. End of Pride Month, but always Pride Month here. I always say that. So I'm so excited because this is a returning guest, someone who I've like known now for a while. We share a lot of like literary friends in common. Rasheed Newson is just incredible. I mean, there's only one sin in Hollywood. I can't wait to dig into it. But if you don't know, his other book that he came on to talk about is My Government Means to Kill Me. You also need to read that, which was selected as a Lambda Literary finalist for gay fiction and was named one of the 100 notable books of 2022 by the New York Times. Also, I think wasn't There's Only One Sin in Hollywood. Oh no, hopefully it'll be a forthcoming Lambda Literary finalist for next year. That's right. I like have th I feel like I've been thinking this has been out for such a long time just because like of all the excitement around There's Only One Sin in Hollywood. But hopefully, I'm sure, fingers crossed. He'll be back in New York City for the Lambda Literary Awards. He also is a television drama writer, producer, showrunner. You might have heard of some of his projects. He co-developed Bel Air, worked on The Chi, Animal Kingdom, Narcos, among other drama series. He's a 2025-2026 American Library in Paris visiting fellow. He lives with his husband and their two children in a place that I really want to visit because I now know so many people who live there, which is Pasadena, um, known for its Matilda film, splendor. It seems like a beautiful place to
It
be.
is. It really
Uh,
is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. A nice
It's a liberal
downtown.
suburb, which is also like a godsend for me.
Yeah, and walkable.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm so excited to have you on, Rashid. I mean, I love that's my husband in the back. Wait, let me
Thank you for having me back.
he's resurrected. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was
Oh,
great because
from
he was
his
headless. Oh
oh,
no,
he's
no,
saying
there
hi
he goes. Hi.
from his stupor. Okay. But yeah, no. It's so good to have you back. And I think that, you know, to actually have your novel set in Hollywood, well, Midwest to Hollywood, and that whole journey. I mean, I feel like you had so much fun with this, with your just Hollywood industry knowledge. So, how did this begin? How did, There's Only One Sin in Hollywood germinate for you?
I I've just sort of self-appointed myself as someone who gets to write about Black queer people through history, particularly American history. And we've always existed, and I just wondered in the 1950s and 60s, how far could a Black queer star go? Because that was an era in which you just had, especially when it came to white stars, several people who were living in like glass closets. Like everybody knew about James Dean and Montgomery Clift and Anthony Perkins. And I said, what would that look like? What would need to be in place for a Black closeted queer person to ascend to the highest levels? Um, I read a lot of books about Hollywood. I love a lot of them. Generally, the star sort of comes fully formed. We don't see the building of how does stardom get built? How is it created? Which is what the studio system was really good at doing back in the day. And so I also was just sort of interested in that. So it's a Hollywood book, but like you said, these people get their roots in the Midwest, and we sort of track how they became the bold names that they became.
And I'm going to mention here a very white oriented novel, but I feel like
Yeah.
your novel really reminded me in an exciting way of like resurrecting the Great Gatsby. Of I was re-listening to the Great Gatsby. I'm doing a book club about it, and I find like the parallels that I see here is like the way that they're all Midwest characters
Hmm.
in the Great Gatsby, and like you just see the downfall of those who can't like sustain this image and like the um materialism. And I feel like your novel is really like exploring in such an interesting way race relations, but
Hmm.
also what I found was so interesting is like I wasn't ready, even though I knew the plot, like reading your synopsis, but I wasn't ready for like almost the like Sunset Boulevard, Chinatown noir type of elements going on, like the detective
Oh yeah. I mean, well,
elements.
I mean, you mentioned the Great Gatsby, and that was like one of the things I loved about the Great Gatsby is like, the Gatsby's in the title, but the book is narrated by Nick. And I've got a movie star at the height of his fame in this book, in Xavier Barlow. But the book is narrated by Aaron, who is a Hollywood fixer who works for the studio and supposed to keep all of Xavier's scandals out of the paper. And that was a big choice I had to make early because I thought, well, you could tell this from the star's point of view, but that is going to be so different from maybe the reader's point of view. I mean, I have to remind people like, in Gatsby, he's successful because he's kind of delusional.
Hmm.
He has these big dreams that sort of propel this outside level of success. Stars are the same way. I was asked recently by somebody I was in conversation with about the idea of like, can you become a star humbly? And I was like, you can become a star with good manners, but part of being a star is believing that you have been chosen, that you deserve the part among all the other qualified, beautiful people in the room. There is a level of ambition and a level of believing that you inherently will defy the odds that makes stardom possible. Like you just kind of can't get there without it.
Yeah, and like there's so many amazing historical references from the Dorothy Dandridge party to, I mean, Diane Carroll, who The Sweetest
Yeah.
Sounds is like one of my favorite songs at
Oh
just
yeah.
musicals. Um, but even Lena Horne, and like you think of Lena Horne, I also think of Judy Garland and like Judy Garland having Lena Horne on her show
Oh yeah.
and platforming. Um, Diane Carroll too, platforming women of color on her show. But at the same time, like Lena Horne, I think her legacy um and platforming is different than Judy Garland. In the sense of like I think definitely Lena Horne, everyone like you see the star status, but she had to work in such a different way than
Well, I
Judy
mean, in
Garland.
this, and by the way, we still have this. There are so many different ways to be famous that Lena Horne, in a lot of ways, like was for a black actress, incredibly famous, in the 1940s even. But by the time you get to the 1960s, has to be reintroduced to a younger audience. And that just keeps happening, that stars have to sort of figure out how to reinvent themselves in a medium in which it hadn't been done before. My daughter is 11. She believes Lena Horne is the woman who sings the ABCs with the Muppets because that's something Lena Horne did in the 70s, and my daughter has seen that video. Um, I mean, what is kind of interesting about the 1950s and 60s is two things. One is like the studio system is really good at making stars, but it's also trying to contend with people who have now been in the business for 20 or 30 years. And that hadn't happened before. And so it's like, well, what do we do with a Joan Crawford? What do we do with a Betty Davis? What do we even do with someone like Sidney Poitier, who in this book is now into his 30s, approaching the big 4-0, and you're not necessarily the young radical lead anymore. it I wanted to talk about the evolution of stardom because now we're still seeing it when it comes to social media in terms of like what does it even mean to be a star? It knocks me out that people joke about Nicole Kidman from the AMC ads she does. Like not her movies. We're talking about the AMC ads
Yeah.
and she's
We
like the
come to this
goddess of theater.
place.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, okay, now this is, there would have been a time in which a movie star would never have done a commercial like that, and yet now it's a major part of like her brand recognition.
Yeah. I mean, I always say to my husband, is that a recession indicator? But I don't know. Like
Well, I mean, it's
I just see
not
a lot
any,
of stars do this. Yeah.
but it's not different than like, there were stars in the 70s and 80s who started doing, hello, I'm wearing Depends right now. Or, like, hello, you can't tell, but I'm wearing a wig. Lauren Bacall did coffee commercials. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like Lauren Bacall of Bogey and Lauren Bacall fame is suddenly talking about High Point coffee and how rich the flavor is. So that's always sort of been in the DNA that being a movie star is actually a temporary job that you hold for a number set of years. You spend more time being a former movie star who has tremendous recognition, but like, what are we gonna do because they're not making roles for you?
Yeah. Well, and like something I'm so curious about your thoughts, Rashid, is like you mentioned Sidney Poitier, but even um remind me again, the first black woman who wins
Hattie
um
McDaniel,
yes, in
Gone with the
Gone
Wind.
with the Wind, right? Um like the way that I mean it's so an incredible achievement, but it's also seeped in like the mammy trope. Like
It's not only that,
how
and also
yeah,
doesn't like open doors. Like it doesn't really happen again until Holly Berry. I mean,
yeah.
it's sort of presented as this pivotal moment in history. That door opens, that door closes. And I'm afraid that a lot of social project, especially in the culture, tends to happen that way. It's not that such an advancement begets opportunities for a lot of people that happen. It's often a one-off, and there are long, long lulls between anyone being able to repeat the feat.
Yeah. And like Halle Berry or Lena Horne, I was introduced to her as Glinda in The Wiz.
Yeah,
Like just glamour. And I mean Lena Horne,
that was her
like
first movie in like 20 years,
wow.
and really her last movie credit. Right?
Wow.
Like her at the moment, I think it's like Sidney Lumet or somebody is directing that movie, and he was her son-in-law at the time. And he said, "Hey, it would be great if you came in and did this role." But like even someone, so it's interesting that someone even of Lena Horne's caliber, you often find there aren't enough roles, there aren't enough opportunities to sustain a career the way you might think it could be sustained, which is why you see them doing things that you kind of go, well, what are they doing here? And I'm like, well, they don't have anything else to do. You can
Mm,
do your club act and tour, or you can take this role. Diane Carroll, who's in this book, is a movie star in this book, but for most of the 80s, starting with Dynasty and then moving on to A Different World and then moving on to Grey's Anatomy, she is a television guest star.
yeah. Sunset Boulevard in Canada.
But only in Canada.
In Canada, which she should have been on Broadway. But
But I
uh
mean, they really wouldn't take
yeah.
her down.
Wow. And I think that but the glamour, the sensuality, like I guess what I'm curious about is do you think like in our history, Xavier is just this really handsome,
Mhm.
suave
Yeah.
man. Do you think that the Hollywood industry, like they recognize the beauty of black actors in the 50s and 60s, but did they actually award them in the way that they were awarding, say, in terms of nominations? And
No, I mean, no. I mean, like,
yeah.
we have to remind people like into the 50s, into the 60s, there are movies that have black leads that will not play in the South.
Mm,
Like the theaters will not screen them. So there's going to be a limit on how successful those movies can be, which then impacts how many of those new members movies are going to get made, which then impacts the number of roles for talent who can perform those roles. I mean, so like there's still a cultural segregation going on that has economic impact on the career of real people. I mean, there's a gap really between you're talking about like black male stars between Sidney Poitier and like Eddie Murphy and Denzel Washington in the early 80s. You don't see, James Earl Jones emerges, but not to the extent of a Sidney Poitier. Like we don't have another black superstar like that until like Denzel, Eddie Murphy. And part of that because we're still dealing with the move through desegregation, and there is a real hesitance on both the behalf of the people who own the theaters, but also the studio execs and the audience. That's like, okay, I'm not sure I want to see this. And so it it it's not just a cultural blip. It had real impact on real lives.
Well, and even like there's so many more accounts of like um classic movie stars passing as white. Like, a good example is Carol Channing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many examples, but like the way that they were literally being whitewashed.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, because
you know,
what's interesting, I mean, like, all of Hollywood is also the idea of like a willingness to change your personhood, your appearance in order to be able to be on stage. Like one of the things I wanted to sort of really highlight in There's Only One Sin in Hollywood is people look at Hollywood and they think that fame and fortune is all people are after. And it really just isn't true. To the extent people are famous, they're hoping that it will lead to the roles that allow them to express their talent at the highest level. That these people really just want to prove how good they are when it comes to acting. And they find themselves chasing or prove they want to prove their bankability, so they have those opportunities.
mm. Well, and a writer who um I always recommend when I'm like suggesting your novels, your work is James Baldwin, just because I feel like you have the same urgent
Oh my
uh
goodness.
social cause.
He's
No, take it,
he's so
Rasheed.
huge. Like, oh my God.
But like, even the way that he was so unapologetically himself, albeit in Paris
Yes.
eventually. But there's like, do you think that right in the literature realm, okay, there's a few, queer black authors you can point to from the 60s, 70s. Again, it's not like a huge
Yeah.
group, but even some theater actors.
Well, Baldwin's interesting to me
Yeah.
because Baldwin, in a lot of ways, I mean, he's bold in the sense because he can't assimilate.
Mm.
He's small, he's queer, he's a little fey, he's all these things. Like, there's just no way he's gonna quote be able to butch it up to pass. And so he stands there and says, "Here I am," which I admire, and which I in many ways relate to. Um, it's interesting about characters. People will be like, "Oh, you were so brave to do X, Y, Z," and I think to myself, it felt like there was no other alternative. I don't know how else to be in this world except like this. And so I'm a little reluctant to sometimes take credit for it or to pat myself on the back for this idea of like, oh, can you believe you said that thing? I oftentimes I say, the words were flying out of my mouth before I thought about it. So
Mm.
if I could be if I could be someone else, maybe I would be more calculating and political. And I probably would have gotten further in this world. But I am I am sort of irrepressibly myself, for good or bad.
Well, that's what we love about your work, Rashid. And like the quote, queer strangers on the make stuck out to me so much because, like, yes, what's going on The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway, I definitely think he definitely is fixated on Gatsby in
Yeah.
a quite erotic psychological way. But I think of Nella Larsen's passing and what goes on there between queer female desire. Like there's just something so interesting in that novel. Um,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I mean, one of the things I liked about having a character like Aaron, who's like a studio fixer and is in Xavier's life, I think Aaron thinks of himself, he's like, I can't be heroic, I can't be a star, but I can be essential to the lives of heroic men and stars. And and his feeling of I'm saving you, I'm protecting you, gives him a feeling of intimacy that is stronger than whoever they're sleeping with. You
Mm.
know, the lovers come and go. You need me. And I think that there is a sexual charge to that. And I think it's pretty common. I think you'll find it in many relationships where you're like, this can't be consummated physically for whatever reason, but this has all the intimacy and all the sexual charge of lovers.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of that line that Sylvia Plath in her poem. It's like there's a charge, there's a charge. That'll
Uh-huh.
take us down a different kind of
Yeah, well
rabbit
said.
hole. But like also just this cruising scene that you bring us into with the Dorothy Dandridge jazz party where Aaron doesn't know that he's actually with the star Xavier, like that
Yes.
Xavier is like exposing himself and like they're going to engage in this kind of cruising act. Do you think that like when you were looking historically at the late 1950s, was there more or less sexual freedom in black spaces compared to white spaces? As we get closer to Pride Month, the Gay and Lesbian Review has a brand new magazine celebrating all things Pride in a special issue called Homo Literarius. So it's all about playing on that idea of homo and the Latin root, which the Latin word homo means person. So not just homosexuality, but how LGBT figures have celebrated one another, have read each other, the lovers that they've had who've also helped inspire their creativity. It is a really interesting issue that includes articles about James Baldwin in Turkey, the gays who kill genre. Think about Thomas Ripley or Hitchcock's Rope or Drew Drogy's Messy White Gays. Christopher Street, a fellow LGBT magazine, just turned 50. So there's an article about how Christopher Street came to be. So much is in this issue, and I can't wait for you all to get your hands on it. You can read the digital issue or you can get the print magazine. Head to glreview.org, use the promo code ITBR choice for a free issue of the magazine, and I know you all are going to absolutely love it as much as I do.
Ooh, I don't know that I think there probably was less freedom in black spaces because there were just less black spaces. And even like when you think of queer spaces at the time, a lot of them were segregated. I mean, we forget it can be easy to forget that, especially in the 50s and 60s, a lot of queer clubs, gay clubs, absolutely upheld segregated sort of policies when it came to letting people in. So there were less black spaces. The thing I really wanted in that scene that I experienced myself when you're young and queer is sometimes those first cruising experiences, you don't know you're about to start cruising. You're just in the steam room, you're just in the sauna, you're in the bathroom, you're walking through the park, and you have to realize, oh God, this is happening. This is happening now. This is happening to me. And I that excitement gives this sort of rush to it. But it's a baptism by fire. And I wanted, Aaron to just be somebody who's like, I really gotta go, I gotta relieve myself, and then finds a different sort of relief when he realizes, wait a minute, what's up? And it's also, at least in my experience, it's amazing how intuitive it is, how quickly you go from I don't know what's going on to wait a minute, I think this is going down. Not that people need to know this, but here we go. When I was in college in DC, I belonged to a gym and I went into the steam room one morning and the man across from me like suddenly made it clear he was cruising me. And there was a half second where I was like, what's going on? Can you do this here? Oh my God, is this happening? And then, of course, I was like, oh, this is kind of hot. I want to, I guess we can do this. And then once you've seen it, once you realize that that is a possibility in the world around you, you suddenly kind of just you see it more, and it's a beginning of a new phase in your life as a queer person.
Mm. Well, no, I appreciate you sharing that. Uh, I'll keep my experiences secretive just because I have a husband
Well,
now.
you have to come back
But
next week. Yeah, you have to do this again and again. I can share and just disappear.
well, but like I feel like you've given us a task, which is looking at novels that have queer cruising scenes. And you're right, like I'm going through the Rolodex and they're very segregated, like City and the Pillar.
Hmm.
Um, you know, even Andrew Holleran's Dancer from the Dance. I mean, there's not a lot of integratedness. Alfred Kinsey's actual studies were like all white men. Um, so like at the same time, do you think, I could ask you like, well, do you think those novels, or do you think like Alfred Kinsey's work is still a liberation type
I
experience?
think it is. I think it
Yeah.
is. I mean, I think it's speaking to a rather common experience, but I just think it's important to know it's not the whole story,
Hmm.
right? Like that's just acknowledging that, oh, wait a minute, we need to think about this differently and more inclusively. I think that's okay. I mean, we are still doing the work of understanding the human experience and understanding history. And I mean, there are going to be levels to history and layers of the story that we're not thinking about now that will seem almost obvious 30 years from now. And I'm
Mm.
okay with that. I mean, like, I wish I had that insight into it now, but I also recognize that that is just how history goes. The further we get from something, the more honest we can be about it, and maybe the more clearly we can see it.
Yeah. Did you have to grapple at all? I know in My Government Means to Kill Me, you definitely, we talked about this, but like in There's Only One Sin in Hollywood, did you feel like you had to grapple with that like idea of um like queer black sensuality also being like tied to a type of queer black suffering? Like I'm thinking of, people will point to Alice Walker's The Color Purple, which yes,
Yeah.
is definitely, you know, iconic for what it does with Seeley
Hmm.
and Shug Avery, but at the same time, what Seeley goes through is incredibly traumatic.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
what I wanted from Xavier was I'd seen all those Douglas Sirk movies, and all the homosexuals of the 50s and 60s are sort of presented as like slowly drinking themselves to death and smoking themselves to death because they're just so miserable and lonely.
Mhm.
And it's sort of funny because when I talked to some people who were, kind of in the closet or in a glass closet going back to the 50s and 60s, they kind of like looked at it as a game. They were like, I was having my cake and eating it too. And I thought of Xavier that way, someone who, especially in the beginning of his career, is rather happy with this deal. He is going to go to a movie premiere with his bestie, Diane Carroll. They're going to be photographed on the red carpet. People will assume they're together. And he doesn't mind that Diane sneaks off with Sidney Poitier because she's in the middle of her 9-year affair with him. And Diane doesn't mind that he's going to go back and sleep with the chauffeur.
Mhm.
And I think he feels like I have the best of both worlds. I feel I write stories that are about political coming of age. And so his understanding of that will evolve. But it was important to me to have someone who didn't feel tortured by the deal they made. He gets to be a star. He gets to have a house with a pool, and he is having the sex he desires. And he's not initially feeling that conflicted about it. That comes later when he starts thinking about other people. But I did want to purposely say, you know what? It isn't the experience of everybody that they are constantly living in pain or coping with misery.
Mhm.
Some people think they've got it good until they learn better.
Mm. Yeah. And you do such a, I mean, the layers of the psyche that you develop in this novel, in all your work, but I was, delved deep into what you're doing with Aaron here, who I think has just such an interesting, um, well, let's get into the family dynamic. Like,
Yeah.
why did you think it was so important? Because, like, this when, his brother, like, and father, like, make accusations about him, like,
Mhm.
almost even like delving into like an incestuous kind of
Well, I caught you
gaze at
looking at
them.
me, which is
Yeah.
normal childhood development. Like everybody, like the first naked person you see is or like adult you see is probably going to be your parents.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean you have sexual desires for them, but in the life of homophobes, just looking at me, they infer that there was some sort of sexual desire, and so I wanted to sort of explore that. I mean, idle curiosity, neutral curiosity is probably what was going on there. And it's no different for queer kids than it is for heterosexual kids. But when you are queer and they catch you looking, there's an assumption that something lascivious is going on. And so I wanted to write that. Aaron is so wedded to his belief that homosexuality must be must be kept quiet and you've got to be very careful with it. I needed to explain to the audience why he believed that and what had informed that view in his life. That when he says to Xavier, you need to be careful, he means with every fiber of his being, you will endanger your life if you don't listen to me now. I mean that's why that part of the story is in there is really to understand where he was coming from.
Mm. Yeah. And I mean, it's a gut punch, that scene.
Well,
Um,
one of my things I was
and
very
so
proud of is like I
important.
did he wins the fight. Like when pressed to defend himself physically against his father and his brother. I mean, this is a small spoiler. It was important to me that Aaron not be the victim of some gay bashing,
Hmm.
that he was able to defend himself, but that doesn't in itself erase the impact of that experience. That I wanted to show that even if you could win the fight, even if you could beat the bully, the fact that you had to fight at all will stay with you.
Yeah. Well, and then he's even able to, um, in this really toxic family situation, that he's able to find the beauty in cinema. Like, I found the way
Mm.
that you use the Midwestern cinema house. I mean, like, I couldn't help but think of Marilyn Monroe at her 100-year birthday, and how,
Hmm.
like, for her, the cinema, like movie theaters for so many, becomes a place of escape, right? Isn't
Oh yeah.
it Tennessee Williams play The Glass Menagerie? He keeps going off to the movies
To the
doing
movies.
something.
Yeah.
Uh, I just find like it was so important that like that thirst is there in his experience.
But I mean, the way we consume movies has changed, right? Like the idea that you used to be able to just sort of sit there and watch it as many times as you wanted, that the reel would change over and you could just, I mean, all of that, it had a different impact that you're sitting there in the dark and the screen is so big and this image is just sort of burning its way into you. I mean, we know now the power of an iPad. An iPad is about as big as your lap. A movie screen, I mean, those kids, I mean, th that era, no one for a nickel, for a dime, you could do 4 or 5 hours of just taking in those large images that people would learn to recite movies the way that actors learn to recite plays.
Mhm.
I mean, that all starts there, and that escapism was rather common, but I wanted to draw what it meant for Aaron as a queer black boy who does not want to go home.
Yeah, yeah. And like, we could take, again, not spoiling, but like what inspired, I found like the whole his journey to get to Hollywood, right? Because like your readers, you're
Yeah,
like, okay, we're so excited. Okay, when is it gonna happen? And then it's like, oh, he's in the Navy. I'm like, oh, this is very interesting.
yeah.
A man at sea. Uh, I always think of the Village People song in the Navy. But like, what was it for you to like add in that military
Well, I wanted
narrative?
to I wanted to talk about like how he got there and um got there with already an understanding of maybe who he could be in the Hollywood sphere. In the Navy, he's the aide de camp to an ace fighter pilot. who's essentially a star. And he makes himself of use to the star in the military. So when he comes to Hollywood, he knows he's already got that skill set. He's already got that orientation. He already knows he recognizes who he could be in this system. A lot of people come out to Hollywood and they initially maybe want to be an actor, or they want to be a writer, but they find some other function for themselves so they can be a part of this industry, even if they can't ever see their name in lights. And that's how most of us get here. That's how most people are sort of drawn to it. And so I wanted to take Aaron on that ride where he was there. I also just wanted to point out, I mean, like it's sort of, yes, people, joke about like join the Navy and that sort of thing and sort of queer jokes. But like San Francisco is a queer city because it had a port. And a lot of people got out of the Navy and they were done with their service and they said, maybe I'll stay here. There is something, or there was something about military service, particularly in the 50s and 60s, that allowed queer people who might have thought they were the only queer person in their town to join something that would take them away quickly and then suddenly, quietly, put them in contact with other queer people. And that connection, I mean, it changed the geography of our country. It's why San Francisco is San Francisco. And I just wanted to sort of pay homage to that or remind people of that.
Yeah, yeah. The Castro became the Castro in a specific
Yeah,
has a specific history.
why
Even
did it
though,
happen there and
yeah,
not Phoenix? Well, Phoenix isn't,
yeah, yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
have a
yeah.
port.
Just don't tell Pete Hegseth that. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. He probably already
Well,
knows.
and that's another thing, like both the military and the movies have this almost laughably rigid idea of masculinity. It's so rigid that almost no man, even the heterosexual ones, can maintain it. They're both invested in this idea of what a man is supposed to be. Yet, some of their greatest stars and practitioners were queer, and they've never really been able to reconcile that.
Yeah, and very bi-curious. I mean, Marlon Brando, James Dean,
Yeah.
um, like, I mean, has that really changed? Like, do you think, because I'm sure you've been getting this question a lot on your tour, which is, has the Hollywood industry really shifted and changed when it comes to the idea of curiosity with sexuality? Why does anything exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? I think that's a question we all, as curious people, have asked ourselves. And let me tell you, Professor Stephen A. Simon's new book is so thought provoking that I can't wait for you all to pick it up. He provides his experience as a professor of political science and philosophy to explore that question with such a variety of perspectives from science, religion, philosophy, and even mathematics. He helps us understand what could possibly explain the most fundamental fact of all, that anything exists. So you can get this from broadviewpress.com. The floodgates have opened with science fiction as a genre in my life because I owe this to my husband and I'm going to give him credit. He has really gotten me to think more about sci-fi, film, and literature. I have to say, Minority Report, absolutely amazing. And Alien, I mean, who doesn't love that alien coming out of that human body in the first film? So, Professor Jason Haslam's new anthology provides a lot of exploration with all different short fiction, so many sci-fi authors, over 200 years, including sci-fi that explores indigenous futurism, feminist science fiction, Afrofuturism. Again, you can get this on broadviewpress.com. And last but not least, my upcoming episode with Professor Matthew James Vachinsky explores his book, which is Original Inquiry, A Guide to Research for Undergraduates, a great toolkit for all faculty out there who are just trying to find a book that helps their students understand how to collect research sources and then, right, the hardest part, build and organize their essay with all of these sources and to make a cohesive argument. I can't recommend Original Inquiry highly enough. So again, all three books can be found on broadviewpress.com. Use the promo code Ivory Tower for 20% off.
Have no fear. Chosen Foods is here to defend your favorite foods from the forces of seedy oils and sketchy ingredients. With cooking oils, salad dressings, and mayo, all powered by the good fats from 100% pure avocado oil and simple, delicious ingredients. Chosen Foods.
I think there's a lot more acceptance among the people in the town and maybe even among the audience. There are still pretty big barriers when it comes to what the bankability of those stars means internationally and in certain roles. I mean, I've been joking, like, I mean, why don't we have a by James Bond? Like, by Bond would be the great, like, why not? Like, he'll sleep with anybody. Like, he'll do whatever needs to be done for love of country. But like that role is thought to be just so he's the ultimate heterosexual man, right? Um, so there's still barriers in terms of what opportunities can come your way if you come out as queer. But I'd like to think that people aren't, in their private lives, a lot of people have found a lot more peace. But yeah, we still got I mean, we still have plenty of closeted actors. That's not going away. And those people are doing that. It's interesting, like maybe there's some shame there, but oftentimes it's a business decision. It is like I want a certain set of opportunities, and I believe they will be withheld from me if I'm honest about this. And so I'm not going to be honest about this.
Yeah, well, like I was going to say, um, there are some definitely historic examples, and I know you know way more than I do, of like, you know, open secrets of queer
Yeah.
black actors or singers even. Like I remember reading about right, Billie Holiday, maybe being bi, or
I mean,
just a
Luther
lot of
Luther Vandross recently
oh,
had a documentary that like couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle it. It's 2026. We all know Luther was queer, and they're like, we're not going to address it. And
wow.
it is amazing how persistent it is. It's very persistent, I think, especially among like the African American and the Black community. I mean, we're still working through this. Um, I mean, that I can name more white queer actors than Black queer actors isn't so much proportional to their representation in the world or the industry as it speaks to what people feel it will cost them with their fan base if they live and speak openly about their sexuality.
Mm. Well, do you think there's um like how is queer black representation in terms of like a mainstream? Like I mean, a film that, you know, I think about is Moonlight and just like how powerful Moonlight was. Um, and what that was doing
Yeah.
with exploring masculinity,
Yeah.
exploring coming of age. But then, you know, um, I
But
keep like,
Moonlight was already how
yeah,
many years ago? I mean, right? Like the
yeah.
thought is that you're going to have something like that win Best Picture, and there's going to be suddenly a flood of representation or more examples of it, and there really just haven't been. I mean, I'm thinking of like there was a movie out of the UK called Femme that had a black queer lead that I really loved, but that remains the exception to the rule. I mean, if you love rom-coms or horror movies, you're going to get a fresh crop of rom-coms and horror movies pretty much every year. If you like queer cinema and queer cinema people of color, you are happy to get something once or twice a decade. And there's no reason that should be that way. We have enough talent and artists to make it different, but the people who make that decision feel like, well, we've done that. We gave you Moonlight. Come back in a few years.
Yeah. It feels very tokenized. Or even
Mhm.
like I even think about with Heated Rivalry, is that gonna like do you think a show like that is opening the doors for more queer representation?
No, it doesn't. I
No.
don't think it works that way. I think I mean, and by the way, almost everything that you like that's interesting and offbeat was an accident. Like,
Hmm.
like there were several meetings where someone tried to kill it, and it's amazing that it got through, it ran the gauntlet, and it's here in front of you. And there isn't actually a rush to replicate those things. In fact, you probably, if you were going in with something like Heated Rivalry, they would tell you not to bother because there's already Heated Rivalry and they're going to have a season two, and you're never going to be able to touch them, and the comparison will kill you. Meanwhile, if we're going to do a show about serial killers or cops or lawyers or hospitals, it never gets old.
Mm. Well, even like the interracial queerness happening in Greg Cope White's Boots.
Hmm.
Like I do think, I've talked with him on the podcast, but I do
Yeah.
think that the public a lot had they weren't able to like package it in a way that was digestible in like that rom-com way of heated rivalry.
And by the way, and I really enjoyed Heated Rivalry.
Yeah.
Someone tell me why Interview with a Vampire didn't get the
Oh yeah.
same heat or treatment. And I think that interracial couple, the dealing of race, especially in those early episodes, a lot of people were like, I'm out, or I don't want to think about that. And there was sort of like escapism fanfic to Heated Rivalry. That's just easier, right? Like if you are going to really center race or class or any of those sticky issues in your storytelling, a lot of the audience is gonna say, I'm out. I still think you should do it. I think it's worth doing, but that there's a cost to that. And again, I don't want to suggest, by the way, that people that don't do that in storytelling are always dodging it. Some stories are escapism, some are going for like a realism. Some people are just more interested in it. But if you're wondering why one set of queer stories gets further than another, chances are the queer story that doesn't also take on race or class or put people in sticky feelings is going to get further.
Yeah. Well, and it is wild to think of like how far have we gone from like what you're looking at in the late 1950s, which like the lavender scare or, the
Mhm.
red scare, but the lavender scare targeting queer people um in business professions and acting industries that, with Boots, like, I mean, I still really think that the current Trump administration had a lot of like put pressure on Netflix and like these companies
What's
now
amazing is how they
are
don't even have to
caving.
make a call. They don't even have to call and threaten. That people who work in business get a sense that their lives will be harder if they stand in allyship with queer people or people who are being targeted by the political administration. No one ever writes a memo and says, you need to quit this. They just all decide this is too much of a headache and we're going to let this go. It's a crying shame Boots only got one season. There are plenty of shows that get second seasons doing those numbers, and it is inherently political that that show got canceled. But I understand that if they came after somebody who made that charge and took you to court, you're never going to find a phone call log. You're never going to find an email that says that. But that's what's pervasive about homophobia is that people know they know what bigots know what to do without being told.
Yeah. Well, or Laverne Cox's comedy show. I thought that what she was doing
Mhm.
was fabulous.
I
You
didn't
know,
watch that one. Laverne, I was like, okay. I'm still trying to figure out like people date. I'm still trying to figure out what was I was dating a MAGA cop. Like I was like, why are you telling me this and what
oh,
do you want me to feel? What do you want me to do with this information?
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, yeah, she's trying to unpack it on podcasts, and she has a new memoir out, so I'm sure
Yeah.
she
I also,
addresses
by the
it
way, I
there.
love people like if when people are sort of I almost like when people come out, celebrities come out and they're like, I have a book about me coming out. I'm like, baby, I would really love it if you could talk to me without trying to sell me this product. Right?
That's true.
Like the commodification, I'm like, really? It underlines the idea of I'm being authentic with you. It's like, well, actually, you're selling me something right now.
Hmm. Well, and that's where I was going to say, do you think that um as Hollywood stands right now, it is a different landscape. And I mean, it's always been different than like Broadway. I think Broadway has
Yeah.
always like taken more creative
Well, you've got to
risks.
fill.
But
I mean,
like,
here's the thing.
yeah,
Broadway, you've got to fill one theater 8 times a week. And on television, we need 10 million people to watch. Like,
Yeah.
right? Like we just we the need of an audience is so much larger on television, and that oftentimes influences who gets to participate and what stories get told.
Well, do you think there's a reason why there's a lot? I'm starting to see a lot of migration of, quote unquote traditional Hollywood, like TV, film actors really taking center stage on Broadway, in like, say, Rocky Horror
Yeah,
Show,
yeah,
in,
because they can't get those
Titanic.
roles on screen. I mean that has always, I think, been the attraction of Broadway, which is if you're feeling typecast in your screen life, Broadway has been more hospitable to letting you play against your type on stage. And as again, this goes back to the idea of like fame and fortune. Most artists really just want a chance to show the audience the full range of their talent. And so even if you're wildly successful on screen in a role, that can feel very constricting, and you want to be able to show and prove to the audience, or maybe just to yourself, that you could do something else, which is why you will see somebody who maybe was known as a comedian on television wanting to do a serious drama, or somebody who's known as a dramatic actor wanting to do comedy. It's at that point, we're not talking about necessarily the money, we're not talking about fame. This person wants it on the record that they had this range within them, and I'm compelled by that. I find that I understand that. I mean, I mean, I could write television for the rest of my life, so to speak, but I love writing books because it allows me to tell stories I am not going to readily get a chance to tell in my television life.
Mm. Well, and like, two texts that I'm kind of like really invested in. Well, your novel, of course, but Stop That Train
Yeah.
and Cat's the Jellicle Ball, I think are really like, right, they're both campy.
Yeah.
I feel like queer camp is really having or just the parody.
Yeah.
Like, there's a type of escapism in that that's also very comforting to like celebrate and uplift the queer community. Do you think that, I mean, it's hard to tell right now, but do you think that both of them, do they have similar projects of like just
Yeah, I mean, I
amplifying
think camp. I mean,
the community?
camp traditionally is like camp is already the first flickers of homosexuality in TV and movies comes through camp. You know, it's that winking, you know, Pauline sort of humor
Mm.
that first sort of comes through, and camp is incredibly powerful. In many ways, it isn't. Um, it's got this sort of it's a secret code. Like camp is obvious to those of us who are in on it. It's amazing how people who are more literate in their thinking or rigid in their thinking don't see camp. I always talk about the Liberace test. There were millions of people who did not get that Liberace was gay, right? They thought he was flashy, they thought he was a showman, but those people they didn't understand camp. And camp still has that. Like there are people who are just like, well, this just seems silly, and I don't know what's going on here. And they don't catch all the levels it's working on. So, I mean, I think camp does tends to do well as a way of sort of subversively getting a queer perspective into a story.
And do you think there's a type of emerging from a political moment right now? I mean, it's hard to like analyze, which is why I love what you do, because you go back to the late 1950s into the
Like,
60s, but
how
like,
did we get through this before?
yeah.
Um, I mean, I think we right now, I think it's being underplayed, even to the extent that I think it's being underplayed the power of repression. The way people have backed away from queer storytellers and queer stories, people of color. There was never a ban or edict that was said, but you're just seeing it in the decisions that are made. I think, I mean, I expect the culture from the mainstream to get extremely white and straight and that is going to last for a while. Now, there will be exceptions, right? There will be things that come through, but I think even before COVID, when you looked at the myriad ways in which queer representation was popping up in the culture, we were just it was just a wonderful, wonderful raging river. I think looking at it now, it looks more like a trickle. So there will be things that come through, but it doesn't compare to what I think we had 5 or 6 years ago.
Hmm. I mean, that's so harrowing and
Sorry, everyone. Happy Pride.
despondent and depressing. But at the same time, though, I think it's so important because it's like the importance of not kowtowing to authoritarianism, or what do they say, like uh giving permission, or
We've got to call it
acquiescing
out.
without being
Yeah, we've
told.
got to
Yeah.
call it out. Yes. Oh, that drives me nuts. And there's a lot of that. We've got to call it out. And I think people have to still push queer stories. I think what's also been sort of happening is there was a feeling that telling diverse stories could get you, quote, all the way. You could get an Oscar, you could make
Mm,
it to the main stage. Are people less interested in telling those stories if those rewards are not so forthcoming? I hope people still want to tell those stories, even though you know you're never going to get the big award and they're never going to, you tell them for your community, you tell them for your audience. So I think part of what we're going to see on our end is who wants to do this work and engage in this sort of creation, even if they're not going to get the big pat on the head from straight society. You still interested?
mm. Well, and I feel like as we end, it like, you know, begs the question of like writing this novel, Rashid. I can only imagine, you know, do you think that, so many people probably want to know from your experience in the industry, like, uh, oh, what's such and such star like? Or like, do they believe the activism that they're like
Yeah.
putting out there in social media? Like, do you think that there is a lot of agency with those who have a public platform, or are a lot of them still really being um pressured, I guess, especially with like, those who are on their team?
I think it depends on what the goal of the star is. If you want to be a bigger star, you are probably going to come up with apolitical stances and you're going to dodge. If if that isn't your first concern, if you're more concerned with your personhood than your persona, you will make different choices. The problem, of course, is that for a lot of people, the building of a persona has been something they've been engaging in for most of their adult life, if not sooner. And they may not have the phone number of their authentic person anymore.
Hmm.
Every decision has, they colored their hair, they fixed their teeth, they got work done on their face. They did a lot to give you this persona. And they're not going to blow it now because there's some problem happening on the other side of the world that they didn't cause. And so they've decided they're just not going to talk about it. And they hope you'll come buy tickets to their movie. Um, the thing about speaking out against, the genocide in Palestine is that ticket goers probably are not necessarily going to buy your movie because they felt you had the political stance that agreed with them. But they could indeed decide to punish you for it, and studio heads could decide to punish you for it. And when you've sacrificed so much to even get to the point of being considered, a lot of people find they don't have the courage or the wherewithal to sacrifice anymore. They want their reward.
Hmm. Well, like even when Susan Sarandon recently came out and said, like, my even at like my level of advocacy and calling out the genocide, uh, I was being um punished in a certain way by the industry. It's just like, wait. even Susan Sarandon. Like it's just wild
Oh
to
yeah, without a
think.
doubt. Without no one,
Yeah.
no one is beyond. No matter how big a star you are, at some point, because of age or track record, you find yourself vulnerable. And one way to try not to have that vulnerability is to just sort of not say anything about anything ever. And I do applaud audiences because I think there are more people watching who realize what silence means and are putting more pressure on them. Unfortunately, however, the audience doesn't get to decide who's going to be cast in this role. And for the decision makers, those calculations tend to be pretty serious. It's in the forefront of their mind. Is this person going to cost me at the box office because they went to this march or they stood up for this thing? That is, of course, a part of the conversation. And I think everybody involved is subject to it.
Well, I have to ask you, um, like, so what do you think of, um, like, do you think that Hannah Einbinder, um, like the way that she's been so vocal about calling out atrocities, it seems like she's made a decision of, I'm going to be politically active. Like, I'm
Yeah,
going to call out what I see.
yeah.
And, um, do you think that like those like Jean Smart, it does seem like Jean Smart has really um there those around Hannah Einbinder have really like supported that, we're
Well, I
we're
think
going to
I think it's
help
I think
you
it's a
do
pretty.
this.
I mean, I think what you're also seeing is somebody being very realistic, which is like, am I ever going to be? Are they going to give me the Julia Robert parts? Probably
Hmm.
not. And if that's the case, I can be more honest about what's going on in the world. I think I think what you're seeing is a lot of people around here think that they could get the big ticket win in some gigantic, let's just say Disney movie that's going to just go wild, right? And they don't want anything in their permanent record that's ever going to come back to keep them from that opportunity. Now, the funny thing is, a lot of them are never going to get there anyway. They're never going to get there. Only that happens to like a half dozen people every generation. But they don't want to rule themselves out. It would be better if more people could just look at their career and go, wait a minute, am I ever going to be like that famous? Am I ever going to be that kind of star? If I'm not, doesn't that give me latitude to be more honest with people about how I feel and what I believe? And I think that's what Hannah is doing.
Yeah. And do you think it matters then, like when Meryl Streep made that really powerful speech at the Golden Globes? Um,
I think it matters, but again, like she's Meryl Streep. She is like at this point, what can they do to her?
yeah.
She's 70 something years
Yeah.
old.
Do you
And
think
it's
like
like,
it trickles down though,
yeah,
I guess?
it will. I'd like to think that maybe she gives more cover to her peers. But
Mm,
like, let's be clear, her peers are like Jane Fonda, who also will do that sort of thing. It, it, the, there is a thing of like I just said, it's subject to everybody, but like there are people who are like their legacies are so set, they again have a freedom in their speech because it's like, well, what are you going, I mean, what are you going to do? But it's also interesting that there are some stars who you would think have that kind of freedom and will not use it.
mm. Well, and I'm just thinking about it's so interesting that Meryl Streep, you know, uh basically like will give the middle like is giving the middle finger, like I don't care,
Yeah,
I have this platform, like I have a comfortability and I'm going to speak out
yeah.
because of that comfortability. But like Anne Hathaway isn't,
Anne Hathaway
uh,
has decades ahead of her,
yeah,
right? Like
it's very calculated.
and here's the thing, almost no one involved in this business is not calculating. You wouldn't have gotten here if you weren't calculating. Like you had to be ambitious and you had to figure it out and you had to do this, that, and the other. The question is, how far do you think this can go? And what's the deal you've made with yourself? I mean, before we talk about politics, the real question is, when you looked in the mirror, what kind of person did you want to be, and how are you seeing this exchange? Which is at the heart of my book. I think at the beginning of my book, Xavier is absolutely okay with being, quote, compromised. As he grows older, it doesn't fit him the way it did, and he wants to make some changes. I'm willing to allow for that as well, that there are people I'm sure who aren't necessarily being as political or as open as I want. I do hope that in 5, 10, 15 years, they look at themselves differently and go, wait a minute, I think I have a responsibility here and I'm going to start meeting it.
Mm. I mean, and have you been like privy to uh conversations, not calling out people, but I'm sure there's a lot of like, off the record actors or those in the industry like talking about things that they would never say on a public platform.
That happens. And I'll also tell you that when you're putting a show together, very early on, before we sort of announce the cast or once the cast is locked, there's somebody who goes through and tries to scrub, like looks at everybody's social media and says, take that down, don't do that, blah, blah, blah,
Wow.
blah. And there is guidance that says, hey, going forward, we'd really appreciate it if you could just sort of like focus on maybe your domestic life and focus on the show and behind the scenes content. No one said don't be political. No one said, but where you're being drawn, that's the wider implication.
Yeah, the message is pretty clear.
Yeah,
Like if you want to continue in this project,
that
here's
this is what we
what
expect.
you should do.
I've seen them literally just like, hey, before go ahead and scrub everything. You can start at zero. You can start over. Or you don't have to do this, but we think you should do this. But like they're very savvy.
Hmm. This is why I enjoy, having authors here. Well, again, I think, an actor who would come into the space is ready to be an open book. And
I was once, this is
yeah,
years and years and years ago. And I mean, like, I was like, who would care what I say? I was on Twitter and I tweeted that this show, one of my favorite shows, got picked up, and I was so happy. And there was another show that got picked up, and I'm like, I don't know why they bothered picking this show up. Within 5 minutes of that tweet, my agent called me and said, what are you doing? Do you want to work with those producers? Would you like to work with that studio? Why do you have a tweet saying you don't think their show's any good? And I was like, taken down, delete it, gone. Right? I'm just going to be a fan of things now. When I like something, I'll tell people I like it. And if I don't like it, I'll keep it to myself. But like, and that was at least like 10 years ago that happened to someone again at my level, pretty low. So you can only imagine what happens when you're the star of the show.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm gonna enjoy the comfort of not necessarily being in their headspaces, but I also want to also say, since you're here, um, I'm not gonna say his name, but I want to thank you also for like you really, um, Rasheed like allowed one of my students to interview him, and like my student then took my queer studies class at Montclair and was like absolutely um changed with your philosophy and
Mm.
just your authenticity and spirit. So I want to thank you for that because, you know, having that kind of
I was happy.
creative collaboration
I
meant a
was
lot.
happy to do it. It's my understanding that, like, I just feel like those are things I'm supposed to say yes to. And it goes to that thing earlier about like character. I appreciate, like, you're like, oh, my authenticity. I really just don't know how else to behave. Do you know what I mean? Like, it it's giving me credit for what are irrepressible characteristics in my personality.
Well, this is why I can't wait to eventually see you in person. I'm gonna have to like go to LA soon. I
One
actually
day in New
may,
York, we will be in
I
New York at the
might,
same time. It will
or New
happen one day.
York, but I might be at MLA, which is actually in the yeah, in LA. So we'll be in touch. But
Yeah.
there's only one sin in Hollywood. There's so much that we didn't discuss because it's a lot of spoilers about
Yeah.
how Xavier sadly, you know, succumbs to a suspicious death, how
Mhm.
Aaron gets involved in this investigation. It's Yeah, so many interesting layers. I also have to shout out your audiobook narrator, fabulous.
Delani Aladdin, he's so good.
It's so good. It's such a good listen. So there's only one sin in Hollywood. Rasheed, where can everyone, find it, and where can they make sure they follow you on
Wherever
social
books are
media?
sold, you can find There's Only One Sin in Hollywood. I encourage you to buy it from an indie bookstore.
Thank you. And I think your Instagram's
Rasheed.Newson.author on
okay.
Instagram.
Rasheed.Newson.author, where Rasheed is very uh is not holding a lot of punches. Or no one's asking you, I think, to scrub your Instagram.
No, no.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much, Rasheed. This was such a pleasure. And
Thank you for having me.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.